Hi, I'm Helen, one of your new co-hosts on A Few of the Many, and today I'll be discussing what it's like to be a woman in politics, as well as just generally chit-chatting with your usual hosts. So I'm really looking forward to being a part of this podcast and getting to know you all. Enjoy!
Hello. I'm here not only with Helen, but obviously Andy Chambers, a fan favourite of the show, as you remember our previous interview. And today we're going to be discussing with our new co-host about her political background.
Hello, listeners.
So, what kind of attracts you to the show?
Well, I just think it's really important to have things like this, different media outlets to sort of get messages across to people, because the mainstream media is incredibly biased. The left wing's voice is never heard. So I think it's really important to have things like this where you've got ordinary people just discussing things.
I think that's one of the reasons why I joined the podcast in the first place, Helen, because I think working class people are brought up never to speak about religion, never to speak about politics because it causes too many arguments. And what we should be taught instead is how to debate and discuss differences without falling out.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. 100%. I think more so now than ever with social media, that's happening, and people are actually having a political opinion and not afraid to air it as much anymore, which is really good.
In line with what we're talking about with that, I know from our previous discussions you've talked about writing for online media outlets as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed writing and blogging, but previously I'd written about beauty and fashion. And when I became involved with politics, people picked up on the fact that I already blogged, and they were like, do you want to write some political blogs? And I was quite nervous at first, to be honest, because to start going off on a tangent politically, like we've just said, people say, stay out of politics, don't, have an opinion. To start writing articles for a particular political side and start having a strong opinion from the political side, I was quite frightened of the backlash at first of that. But I wrote for some online blogs and things, and it just it went down really well, and I got a really good reaction, and then more and more outlets started coming to me and asking me to write for them. And then I eventually wrote some stuff for Labour Vision. And I think it's just, I suppose, really being female as well, I was somebody a bit different, and somebody with a bit of a different perspective and different experience within the party than your typical sort of stereotypical middle-aged man. So people like to hear my opinion because I didn't fit the status quo as such.
Well, yeah, I totally agree, and I'm sure you agree with me as well, Andy, is that, there's such a domination of a certain niche demographic.
Yeah, there is. And I completely understand your nerves, Helen, when you were first asked to do it, because I'm secretary of my CLP, and even though I've been writing all my life and I've got a master's degree in English literature and language, when I first became secretary, I was asked to do a weekly newsletter, telling just our members, it weren't even the general public, just our members, stuff the candidates had been up to, campaigning sessions, anything that might be of interest. It was only a very insignificant little thing. And for the first 6-7 weeks I did it, I was absolutely wrecked with nerves about making sure everything was absolutely perfect before I pushed the send button. And the feedback I got from members was lovely, even people I'd never heard of, you know what I mean? Because you get members who don't come to meetings and stuff, they were like, this is brilliant. Yeah. So I understand that those nerves completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially some of the things I was writing about were, things like Grenfell, which are the touchy topics, aren't they? And, you're expressing an opinion that some people might not necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
So it was difficult at first, but I really enjoyed doing it, and as I said, the feedback I got, or at least 99% of it, you obviously got the odd person that would tear into you and completely disagree with everything you'd said, but that's fine, people are entitled to an opinion, and I was just really glad to, to have that platform to put my opinions out there was fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, and you're certainly a very welcome addition to this platform.
Going back to the question about left-wing media and things like that, what kind of topics were you approached to write about or chose to write about yourself, Helen? Were there any particular recurring themes or areas of interest?
I mean, a lot of the time it was about sort of being a woman in politics and my experiences of being a woman in politics, because obviously there have been a lot of issues for women in politics, and particularly when you look, the average age of an MP is something like 60, and they're predominantly male. There's a reason for that. There must be. So why aren't young women coming into politics, and why aren't young women staying when they do come? So a lot of the things that I wrote were sort of addressing that and my experiences, which I have to say have generally been positive, but you can certainly see that we've still got a way to go.
Do you think, in your personal experience, what kind of reasons do you think there are?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing is slightly intimidating. I mean, I've sort of learned to live with it now and I've got used to it, but it's not unusual to be the only woman in a meeting. It's not unusual to be the only woman that, gets elected onto a particular committee or platform. And the way Labour's chosen to tackle this is through positive discrimination, where they will basically say a woman has to be elected to this position. You'll see it throughout branches, throughout CLPs. So they positively discriminate and have female-only roles, which is fantastic because it gets women into them roles. But then on the flip side of that, you have the backlash of men who then say she's only got that because she's a woman.
Yeah, and I've heard that, and it particularly irritates me because when there's a disparity between the number of women in roles in the Labour Party, in the elected roles, but when there's a difference, when there's such a vast difference between how many women are elected into roles and how many men are, then I don't even see it as discrimination, it's just equalising.
Rectifying.
Yeah, rectifying an imbalance. And we had a candidate in Mansfield's selection recently. Parliamentary candidate it was, parliamentary selection. Yeah, we had a candidate apply for our selection in Mansfield last year. And he came with lots of, I've done this, and helped this and this and this. But then when we tried to track his history online, there was nothing. But the one thing we found, I think it was Oxford or Cambridge Council, something around, but don't quote me on that. He was in a Twitter conversation and a woman said, there are only 2 women on the council. For the next elections, we need to do some all-women selections.
Shortly, yeah.
And his response, this candidate who came to try to be our MP candidate, his response was, OK then, which hard-working male councillor would you deselect just because he's got a penis come the election? You know what I mean? So that turned us all off to start with. And that sort of reaction you get even in this day and age when Labour have had all women selections and like 50-50 officer positions for a long time now. We still need to do more work, you're right.
Yeah, you definitely still do come across those attitudes. And definitely wouldn't say it's the majority of people. A lot of people do support it. And even at first, before I really understood it, even I was slightly taken aback by it, that it was like, when I was applying for things, it was like, oh, this is a female-only shortlist. And it was like, well, hang on, why do we only get to go up against women? If I'm going to get selected, I want to get selected because I'm the best person. I don't want to get selected because I'm the best woman, So you definitely can see both sides of it, but as you said, there was such a disparity that it had to be addressed, and eventually, naturally, Labour will be able to stop that because we will have equality and we will have 50% men and 50% women in positions, but until we get to that point, it's something that I personally think has to be done. Because, new young women coming into the party, when they walk into their first meeting, and it might be 80% male, if they can see that there are female officers, and they can see that there's female councillors and female MPs, they can then see that there is a place for them in the future and that there's a path for them to take to get there. Whereas I can imagine that years ago, women going into that position must have felt like aliens.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, I think there's been a lot of evolution over the years, but obviously there's still a lot of work to do, particularly when you consider that it's the year 2019 and that, we're still having to talk about this as an issue is, indicative of the fact that there is still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It even shows in things like, every time I go to anything Labour, I end up on TV, and it's because I'm a young woman.
Yeah.
And as the camera's panning round looking for people, they go, there's a young woman, put her on. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise it's just man in suit, man in suit, man in suit, man in suit, middle-aged man in suit.
Yeah,
and then it's like, oh, young woman in a skirt, wow. Do you know what I mean? It is literally, honestly, every time I go to anything, national conference, regional conference, when I've gone to rallies, I always end up on TV. I'm always getting people texting me, oh, you've just been on the news, and I'm like, it's too much of a coincidence. It's because you're different and you stand out. I always just laugh and think, like, God, it's a good job you got rung in work 6 to go or something, isn't it? Because you're all over the national news.
You'd be rumbled for sure. That actually happened to a mate of mine who was filmed at Trent Bridge at cricket when he phoned in sick.
Honestly, you just couldn't write it, could you? Imagine that happening. How you would justify that, I will never know.
I know.
So we're talking about, obviously, you, Helen, in 2019, but let's sort of wind back time a bit. Tell us about your political upbringing, your family influences, if any. Was it school? What kind of personal experiences sort of gave you the socialist left-wing outlook in life?
Well, I come from a very working class northern background. The town that I live in is very Labour. It's a Labour stronghold. And both my parents are Labour voters. And I remember when I was probably, how old was I? 14, and Labour won the general election, and my mum cried. She cried because she was that relieved that Labour had finally got in. And, we'll put aside the Tony Blair thing and people's opinions on that. She was just that relieved that finally it was a government that was going to stand up for them.
Yeah.
That, she was absolutely overjoyed. And I wouldn't say my parents were particularly political. My dad was a trade union member. And growing up, all I remember is that my dad worked for a local authority, and he was always on strike. Like, always on strike. He was just like, why are you not at work, Dad? We're on strike. What are you doing? We're on strike. And it was constant. So I was sort of brought up with quite a strong sense of, you stand up for what's right and you stand up for yourself and you don't let people walk all over you. But politically speaking, I wasn't really, there was nobody sort of talking about socialism or anything like that around me. And I think probably a lot of it is just down to my own personality. I'm a very compassionate person. And when I was a child, nobody in our family is vegetarian. And when I was 9, I turned around and said, I'm not eating meat anymore. I can't do that anymore. And my mum was like, okay, well, we'll respect your decision. But I think a lot of it has just come from within myself. And then I think the biggest thing that the first time I remember thinking about injustice was when I was at school and we were reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I remember being so upset by that story and feeling the sense of injustice as though it was happening to me. And ever since then, I've just had this sort of, I've always felt a sense of responsibility, I think, to stand up for other people, even if it's not something that particularly directly impacts me. I want to stand up for people, for anybody that's being oppressed or being unfairly treated. I just want everybody to be looked after and safe and happy. And so I think politically, really, I didn't really care about politics in my teens or really in my 20s. It was when I sort of got into my 30s and then I started facing things and started understanding that actually a lot of what was happening to me and why my life wasn't going swimmingly was because of the people in charge of the country. And then once I started putting 2 and 2 together, I got angry. And that made me think, right, no, this has got to change, this isn't fair. Why am I, there's two of us working, why can't we afford to keep a roof over our head? Why is minimum wage not good enough? Why can't we afford to buy our own house? Why can't we get a mortgage? And it was things like that that sort of really angered me. And I joined the Labour Party, and that was in 2015 under Ed Miliband. And then once, obviously, as you two will know, once you join, there's no going back, is there? You're in. You can't escape then once you're in.
It's great that empathy fueled your life, and that turned to, well, you're still empathetic, obviously, but now you're angry at the injustice. And I think a lot of socialists feel the same way,
Yeah.
That we obviously care about people, and we are angry that society has gotten away with this for so long.
That's it. And I think the more people you come across in life, and the older you get, and you start seeing people with disabilities who can, I'm not even going to say can barely get by, they can't get by. A lot of them, full stop, a lot of people with young children who just can't get by, who can't make ends meet. People who are working and having to use food banks. Things like that, there's just no justification for. There's no justification. And things like that are what just once that light went on in my brain and I realised that that's what was going on and who was responsible for it, that's when everything changed. And I realised that I couldn't sit by passively anymore and just sort of like sit watching the news and think, oh, that's sad, that's upsetting. I had to then get involved and be a part of the change, which is what I did in 2015 and have been doing ever since.
Brilliant. And I think we're all part of changing history. This right now, we are all part of a movement that's changing history, that's going to make history. And if we win, it'll be brilliant.
That's it. And there's no if we win, we have to win, because too many damn people's survival depends on it, doesn't it? We have to. And it doesn't matter how long it takes us. We have to get a socialist government and a socialist country because too many people are dependent upon that.
Yeah, you're right.
What do you think the main roadblocks are to developing a consistently socialist path within the Labour Party, which for a long time has been led by interests which people could say are more toward the right wing of society rather than people which actually depend on solid social democracy and socialist policies for just a good quality everyday life?
I think it's probably just a case of it's getting the right people within the party into the right positions. So when I joined the party, Ed Miliband was the leader of the Labour Party, and that was fine, and the Labour Party was still much better and much more out there for the ordinary person than any other political party was. And then obviously change came and there was a leadership election and the candidates came about, and it quickly became apparent that Corbyn, although he was this backbencher at 200 to 1, was the person that we needed to get into the leadership. And we did it. Against all odds, the membership did it because we knew that's what we needed to do. And we've faced so many problems since, not just from within our own party, but from the national press and from the opposition. And we've overthrown him. We put him back up for election and we won again. And I think it's a case of that's what we've got to do. We've got to have the right people. And when, as members of the party, when we're selecting people to be councillors and when we're selecting people to be MPs, and not just on that level, even within, the lower ranks of the internal party, when we're electing people to committees and when we're electing people onto executives of CLPs and executives of branches, we need to make sure that we're putting people who hold real socialist values into those positions, because they're ultimately the people with the power to change.
And, well, I mean, there's not a single word that I could possibly disagree with. It's absolutely spot on. It's kind of going back to the old question about left-wing media and developing a socialist consciousness. How best do we go about encouraging members to, sharpen their critical faculties? Because one of the things which obsesses me day and night politically is Corbyn was obviously an easy choice because his record spoke for itself. What about after Corbyn? How do we ensure that's not going to be a counter-revolution in slow motion because people are saying the right things but their records don't necessarily speak for that, and people are more sort of taken by what they're saying now when Corbynite speech and ideology is in vogue for those who know that they've got to win the party, but don't necessarily believe in that themselves.
Yeah, well, obviously, as a membership, we have to hold them to account, don't we? And we have to make sure that it's not just lip service, but that these people are actually going to deliver what they're saying that they're going to deliver. You know, it's easy for people to, like you said, to stand on a very socialist manifesto if they go up for the leadership, but then not deliver it. But if they don't deliver it, then we have to hold them to account.
How do we hold them to account? Think about Tom Watson. You know, he's obviously not in tune with the membership, but it's being impossible to get him out of that position. So that's why I think it's very dangerous to elect the wrong leader. And what kind of reforms do you think are necessary to prevent that from them hijacking the party in the way that, in a sense, Corbyn did hijack the party and change course dramatically? So,
yeah, do you know, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think you've got to be careful what you put in place, because at the same time, unfortunately, the party isn't entirely united, and I think it's a positive thing that the Labour Party, like I said earlier in the discussion, the fact that we're a left wing and we have so many different opinions on topics, I think is a fantastic thing. And I don't think that every single MP we have has to have the same opinion on everything. I think that'd be really dangerous if they did. And I think if you start bringing in rules within the party that's like mandatory reselection, things like that, it can work both ways. And at the same time, you could have somebody fantastic that the right wing then decide that they're going to get rid of because they're too left wing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if there was rules within that, it could be like, oh, you can overthrow somebody because you don't like what they're saying or what they're doing, that would work both ways. And in the same way that, you know, the coup with Corbyn, it's kind of dangerous, isn't it? I don't know how stringent these rules can be.
What can work for one side can work for the other, and I think that's what we've always got to keep in mind, because one of the things which disturbs me about even people in our local party is the second something, I don't want to say minor, but like something, there's a controversial decision and lots of people will say, oh, I'm leaving the party now because this one thing didn't go my way. It's like, well, that's exactly what the right wing want you to do, so you're not going to be there to offer further resistance. And that is why I think people have the right values, but they're not solid enough, they're not long term, they're not thinking strategically enough. Yeah,
but I think a lot of people, to be fair, kind of came into the party like I did. I came in Jamila Banton, and the next thing you've got this Corbyn election, and you know, I came in at such a revolutionary time for the Labour Party, and people aren't necessarily always experienced and don't always fully understand the way politics works. And particularly what I found interesting with all this is that the actual internal party politics are far more complicated than the external red versus blue versus yellow versus... Do you know what I mean? Like, the actual internal party politics is the thing that's the hardest to get your head round. And I think, like you said, I've seen it loads on Facebook, people cutting up membership cards and throwing in the towel and going, oh, I don't like this anymore, I can't be bothered with this anymore. And it's like, do you know what? The best way to fight something that you disagree with is from within. If you leave, you have no influence.
Well, exactly.
If you stay, you do have influence, and you know, you can bring about change if you stay. Are you going to like everything that happens? Absolutely not. But the best way to bring about change is to stay and to stand up at the next meeting and to bring it up and to fight for it.
I agree wholeheartedly, Helen. Wholeheartedly. And lots of socialists stayed in the party throughout the Blair years. You know?
Absolutely, so many, and they waited a long time for their time to come, but it did come.
Well, the ultimate example is Corbyn himself, because he could have left or resigned after Iraq, which was a massive slap in the face for him. And if he hadn't been there, where would we be now?
Yeah. He's a great inspiration for all kinds of things like that.
One question I want to ask you, which I'm particularly interested in, is obviously you live over in Merseyside, which is rock solid Labour territory and a proud socialist tradition in so many ways. Do you see a lot of evidence of that in day-to-day life, or bleeding into the local culture? What do you think makes Merseyside so rock solid Labour and so, as Andy has told me before, so proudly anti-fascist, whereas other areas, particularly our own area, doesn't really demonstrate that in such a perceivable way?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of the industry, and a lot of that is even before my time, but this town that I'm from was a coal mining town that got absolutely screwed over by the Tories. They shut all the mines. People were out to work. There are still no proper jobs in this town, and this town is the suicide capital of the country. It's people's prospects here are terrible. So people are never going to vote for a party that did that to this town. It's never going to happen. People here will never forget what the Tories did. But as well as that, I think there's been, just generally in the north, there's probably been a lot more industrial, hasn't it? You know, the Industrial Revolution, I think, and because of the kind of jobs people did, even 100 years ago or more, in the mills and in the factories and things like that, where the conditions were terrible, and it was trade unionism that brought better working hours, better working conditions and things like that, and the unions have always been so closely linked to the Labour Party that that's probably where people's political allegiances formed and have continued to lie. But I mean, generally speaking, yeah, you know, there's not a day that goes by pretty much everyone you meet to go like bloody Tories, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just a general. And I think as well, like, if you look at Liverpool in particular, which is about 10 miles away from where I live, they've faced massive injustice themselves with things like Hillsborough, and the fighters, and they will not stop, and they will not stop until they got the truth. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's kind of the personality of people from this area that is just naturally quite socialist, I think, and quite sort of moral, and people will just, they'll stand up for what's right and what's decent.
You know what, Helen? About 5 times, me and Mike are sat opposite each other with his laptop in between us, and at least half a dozen times we looked up and like thumbs up or like the A-OK sign.
Thank you. It's so hard, isn't it? Especially like I'm sat here. I talk with my hands as well, so I'm sat here like as though you can see me talking with my hands.
You know, say what's what.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
You already are a welcome addition, but I think you're going to be a great input to our content.
It's just a shame it's on telly so you can put subtitles.
Yeah.
We'll publish a transcript.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add or go over again or anything like that?
I don't think so. Was there anything that was a bit ropey or?
Only our contributions.
Yeah.
Yours was absolutely bang on.
It's nice. There's going to be a lot less swearing than usual to edit out as well. So thank you for that.
It's really good, really good. Yeah, we thought you were brilliant, Ellen, and I knew you would be. You know, that's why we asked you.
That was absolutely awesome. Thank you ever so much, Helen. And
you're very welcome. I hope it turns out it's all right.